Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you find yourselves. Welcome to this panel on Japan's space strategy and implications for its regional alliances. My name is Ali Stickings, and I'm the Research Fellow for Space Policy and Security at RUSI here in London. This event comes off the back of Chatham House's Security at the Frontier conference, which was held in early December 2020. And that explored UK-Japan perspectives on cyberspace, outer space, the Arctic, and electronic warfare. So I'd also like to bring your attention to the resulting conference paper, which is due to be published tomorrow. So do keep an eye out on the Chatham House website for that. Japan has long been a very important actor in space. I think we're all aware of some of the quite extraordinary activities that they've undertaken, particularly in solar system exploration. But it's not alone in responding to what is considered to be increased security threats in orbit. Space is central now to its national and regional security policy. It's changing the way its military is approaching space, and it's also looking at how to cooperate with allies and partners to confront the challenges. And so there are a number of questions that arise from this, on the future direction of Japan's outer space policy, the implications specifically for its regional alliances. So to help us understand all of this, I'm joined by two experts. The first is Sadia Pekkanen. She is the Job and Gertrude Tamaki Endowed Professor at the University of Washington in Seattle. She earned her master's degree from Columbia University and Yale Law School, and a doctorate from Harvard University in political science. She's the founding co-director of the Space Policy and Research Center and the founding director of the Qualitative Multi-Methods Program. And she's also currently co-editing the Oxford Handbook on Space Security. And we're also joined by Taro Hayashi, who is a Japan Chair Fellow at the Hudson Institute, where his research includes Japanese defense strategy and US-Japan defense cooperation. And prior to joining Hudson, he was a deputy director at the Defense Policy Division and Strategic Planning Division at the Ministry of Defense in Japan. Each of them is going to speak for approximately 10 minutes just to give us some opening thoughts and overview, and then that should give us plenty of time for Q&A and discussion. Please do use the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of the screen. You don't need to wait until then to ask your questions. Please have them coming in as you think of them. Just a reminder as well that this event is being held on the record and it is being recorded. Thank you all in advance for all of your questions, and hopefully this should be a really rewarding discussion. And on that note, I'd like to hand over to Sadia, who can give us her thoughts. Thanks, Sadia.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you to Chatham House for this event and to Chloe Sageman for helping to organize it. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation with both Ali and Taro Hayashi. What I'm going to do is to reflect on broad themes about Japan's space strategy and its alliances. I think this is an important time to do so, as Japan's foremost ally, the United States, has marked geopolitics with a return to great power competition and also marked space as a warfighting domain. What I want to do is to reflect on where Japan stands on these issues, where and how it is charting its own distinct pathways in outer space activities, and what that suggests about its alliances and partnerships going forward in a changing world order. Now, here's the thematic essence of how I see Japan's space strategy. Japan's space strategy is driven by the top levels of Japan's political leadership today, all the way up to the Prime Minister. The goal is to proactively contribute to international security while advancing Japan's own industrial and national security interests. To bring about, to realize these goals, Japan's foundational technologies position it to compete and partner across the world. Its legal and policy frameworks today synchronize its civilian, commercial, and military uses of outer space, and its space diplomacy keeps it abreast of the fluid interests of both collaborators and competitors in the shifting geopolitics today. Let me draw out these themes specifically in the rest of my remarks by first concentrating on the basis for Japan's space strategy, and second, how that space strategy is manifesting internationally vis-a-vis partners. And then I think we can have a discussion. I'll just put some broad things on the table. So let me begin first with the basis for the strategy. As Ali was pointing out, Japan is a long-standing space player, and space technology is foundational to Japan's strategy, and its preservation and development is of significant and stated interest to the Japanese government. This is consistent with the country's historical emphasis on technology acquisition, as well as long-standing and culturally deep-rooted ideas about what makes countries wealthy and strong. Japan today is one of the world's top and independent space powers, a mere handful of such powers around the world. It has full spectrum, state-of-the-art capabilities on both the liquid and solid fuel rockets, as well as every potential range of spacecraft and satellites imaginable. In other words, it can get into and do what it wants in space. It doesn't need anybody's permission, and it is not a junior partner to anyone. Its latest generation of space entrepreneurs are also keeping abreast of broader trajectories in what are called new space developments. And this is typified by such companies as Axel Space for Earth observation, Astroscale for space debris removal, Synspective for space-based data analytics, and iSpace for lunar rovers and building a lunar economy. You might think that most of these are new, but Japan's older established conglomerates such as Mitsui have also gotten into the new space game. After review by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States in 2020, Mitsui, along with Yamasa, now owns Seattle-based space rideshare company Spaceflight, which brokers ride shares for satellites and spacecraft. So all these technologies, I would say, are basically dual use, meaning that their uses go across commercial and military domains. And this is no longer controversial in Japan. Thanks to concerted and very dedicated political leadership, Japan's space technology is enabled by greater legal and policy clarity than ever before. It is also potentially empowered by the unprecedented degree of open institutional coordination that brings together its civilian, commercial, and military space building blocks in the service of Japan's national space strategy. In 2008, Japan's first ever basic space law officially changed Japan's ability to engage with the military uses of space more in line with international interpretations. More significantly for institutional coordination, in 2012, JAXA, which is Japan's NASA, similar to your space agency, JAXA's foundational law was also changed to allow it to engage in military space activities. Since JAXA is and will remain the powerhouse for space R&D, this legal change is significant because it means JAXA can engage in national security space technology projects, such as with the Ministry of Defense, a goal stated by JAXA's leadership today. The Ministry of Defense is also engaging with Keidanren, which is Japan's business federation, to promote commercial defense equipment and technologies, which is made possible by the 2014 easing of the arms export ban. And of course, this will include space technologies. So second, let me talk a little bit about how this basis for Japan's space strategy manifests internationally. I would say that these technology foundations and these institutional realities allow Japan to chart its own strategic pathways internationally. And they span all elements of Japan's national power vis-a-vis its partners, military, economic, diplomatic, and so on. With the United States, the focus tends to military aspects of Japan's space strategy. And I think Hayashi-san is going to tell us more about this as well. Just to give you a little preview of what this is. I certainly think that this aspect gets and deserves a lot of attention as it marks a military alliance that extends to space. Both countries agree that there are threats in and through space and that they need to be countered. And setting aside natural hazards, I would say that these threats come not just from accidental, but also deliberate events that are amplified by the return to great power competition. Leadership in both countries has spoken about the importance of protecting against harmful and malicious actions against space assets, and also about gaining superiority in the space domain. Let me just, such high talk aside, I would say more practically, both the US and Japan share a common interest in space domain awareness and of building out technology platforms to counter against natural, accidental, as well as deliberate threats against their space assets, which underwrite their security. The formation of Japan's Space Operations Squadron in 2020 and its expanding partnership with its counterpart, the US Space Force, is also part of Japan's military space strategy that will build out and expand our view of what is going on in space. And to be specific, they're building out their platforms for interoperability, as well as developing doctrines and strategies that showcase their interest in using each country's commercially driven technology platforms to counter threats such as orbital debris and other events. Japan's QZSS satellite system, for example, will complement the US GPS system. And historically, Japan will be launching US sensors on these Japanese satellites. Aside from technologies, I would say that Japan is likely to be part of the Multinational Space Collaboration Office at Vandenberg Air Force Base, a new unit for US allies to align policies and TTPs, tactics, procedures, and techniques, I think it is. I would say, though, that there are other aspects of Japan's engagement with the US that also showcase other aspects of its strategy. Japan has also signed up to the US Artemis Accord, designed to enhance civil exploration of the moon, Mars, comets, and asteroids for peaceful purposes. Step by step, Japan has made inroads into the commercial partnerships that the US is also interested in leveraging. For example, when SpaceX flew its historic missions, historic commercial crew missions, non-NASA astronauts included Japanese astronauts for the first time and will also be part of the second mission. Most recently, JAXA has expanded its budget significantly from about 150 million to about 500 million for space exploration, which is likely to include also the formidable Hayabusa spacecraft. Here is my cautionary note. Japan's space strategy, I would say, is not just positioned or positioning for the here and now under the Biden administration. It also has to position for what may come politically after the Biden administration in the United States. This is why I think other aspects less well known also have to come into sharper focus, giving us a way to gauge other aspects of Japan's strategy that go beyond the United States. Let me mention two. One aspect of Japan's space strategy manifests in the Asia-Pacific Regional Space Agency Forum. This is a forum, APRSAF, that dates back to 1993. For over a quarter of a century, Japan has used this soft and informal forum to draw together countries' space activities and aid their technological space capacity. It has a signature conference annually. And I think what this does for Japan is that it clues Japan into the needs and ambitions of other aspiring space powers, particularly in terms of advancing their capabilities for remote sensing, for example, for disaster management. APRSAF, I would say, is also a useful platform to build a standing and flexible forum for dialogue and partnerships that are necessary for building responsible behavior in space. And finally, I would say it is also a platform which presents an opportunity to engage China. Delegation from China-led Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation, APSCO, the other space organization in the region, have also made an appearance in APRSAF's deliberations and conferences. One other aspect, the second aspect of Japan's space strategy, and I'm almost at the end, also reaches out a little bit apart from East and Southeast Asia to the Middle East and also to India. Japan's space technology and its diplomatic platforms give it a lot of soft space power, so to speak. Japan launched, for example, the UAE Mars probe last year, and that has now arrived at Mars. This is a huge soft power win for Japan and has given a huge boost in credibility to its relationships and partnerships in a region where space ambitions are rising and there's a significant interest on the part of moneyed governments. From the UAE to Saudi Arabia and even on to Turkey, Japan is in a good position to leverage its interests and build coalitions. With respect to India, the countries have a number of agreements on Earth observations and I think robots and satellite data. And just very recently, in March, a few weeks ago, they are cooperating to launch, I believe, the Lunar Polar Exploration, the LUPEX mission that is scheduled for 2023. This LUPEX mission, of course, gets a boost, I think of about $26 million. I mentioned the new budget increase of JAXA, but it's also, I think, gets an additional boost in terms of Japan's strategic initiatives under the free and open Indo-Pacific cooperation with the Quad. So those are some of the ways that Japan is using its space strategy to solidly advance its own industrial and national security interests proactively and around the world. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Sadia, thank you so much for that really fantastic, very comprehensive overview of Japanese space policy. And I think, you know, what that really highlights is just how different space policies are across different countries and how everyone's approaching it in various ways. And I think it just brings home that need to understand the different ways they're approaching it to ensure that these alliances work. You know, really interesting. And I think also, when you're thinking about the US and its partners, Japan, unlike quite a few of the other partners that the US has, is much more mature in so many ways, so many technical capabilities. And again, how that changes that relationship and how that relationship might offer different opportunities for the US than it might do with some of its other partners. Taro, would you like to give us your thoughts?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ali, Dr. Pekkonen, and Chatham House for giving me this great opportunity to discuss Japan's space strategy with you. As my opening remarks, I'd like to mention an overview of Japan's current outer space policy, and then space cooperation opportunity. As an overview of Japan's current outer space policy, especially in terms of national security purposes, I'd like to mention 3 documents. Those are the Basic Space Law in 2008, and the Basic Plan on Space Policy in 2020, and the National Defense Program Guidelines in 2018. First, as Dr. Pekkonen mentioned, the Basic Space Law in 2008 officially opened the door to the security use of space by Japan, which used to be restricted by political or legal arguments. And second, regarding the Basic Plan on Space Policy, the 2015 version of the Basic Plan designated the security use of space as one of the 3 pillars of Japan's space policy. The new 2020 Basic Plan maintains this emphasis on space security and also underlines the importance of cooperation with other countries and with the private sector. Third, the National Defense Program Guidelines, or the NDPG, in 2018 says that the security environment surrounding Japan is becoming more and more testing and uncertain at a remarkably faster speed than expected. In such an environment, the NDPG emphasizes that in order to deter and counter qualitatively and quantitatively superior military threats, it is crucial to adopt cross-domain operation, which combines capabilities in new domains and those in the those in traditional domains. The new domains mean outer space, cyberspace, and the electromagnetic spectrum. And the traditional domains mean the land, sea, and air. Regarding outer space, the NDPG says that in order to ensure superiority in the use of space, the self-defense force will continue to improve various capabilities such as information gathering, satellite communication, and positioning, navigation, and timing. Also, based on the NDPG, the self-defense force has begun to strengthen its space mission assurance capability and space capability to disrupt the opponent's command, control, communications, and information. Based on these documents, especially based on the NDPG, now outer space capability is one of the top priorities in strengthening Japan's defense capability. For example, last year, the Self-Defense Force established its first space unit called Space Operations Squadron as a part of the Air Self-Defense Force. In the next fiscal year, the squadron will be upgraded to the Space Operations Group, and to begin with, it will conduct the Space Situational Awareness (SSA) mission with its now constructing Deep Space Radar and JAXA's telescope. Regarding SSA, the Self-Defense Force also started to procure an SSA satellite in this fiscal year. Now, I'd like to move on to the next topic, space cooperation opportunities. Considering Japan's challenging security environment, severe fiscal situation, and declining population, the basic plan and the NDPG point out that Japan needs to strengthen its capabilities both effectively and efficiently. From this perspective, it is crucial for Japan to strengthen cooperation with the US and other countries, and also with the private sector. As an example of such efforts, Japan's new SSA system, which will be operated by the Self-Defense Force, has been designed to share information with the US CISPOC and also with JAXA. Japan's unique geographical location, which means being located in Asia, will add an advantage to the US-led global SSA system. Also, the information and warning provided this new SSA system will allow the private entities to invest in and use the outer space more safely. Regarding the Japan-US bilateral cooperation, currently SSA is the center of effort, while PNT and maritime domain awareness can be areas of potential cooperation. Also, small satellites and their constellations will be another key areas of cooperation in terms of both security use and civilian use. The small satellites will not only reinforce space capabilities at a low cost, but also strengthen the resiliency of both countries' space assets and capabilities. In addition, the bilateral cooperation includes more specific programs, such as loading American sensors to Japan's QZSS satellites. Such expansion of hosted payload cooperation will enable both Japan and the US not only to efficiently improve space capabilities, but also, again, to strengthen the resiliency of both countries' space assets. Moreover, these kind of opportunities I mentioned in the context of Japan-US bilateral cooperation can be more or less applied to the cooperation between Japan and countries other than the US. Japan has started space dialogues with Australia, France, EU, and most recently with India. Also, Japan has participated in multinational tabletop exercises on space security, such as the Shuriba War Game and Global Sentinel. I'd like to conclude my opening remarks by saying that Japan has clearly determined to strengthen its outer space capabilities more rapidly and intensively than ever. When I was a section chief for space policy in the Ministry of Defense 5 years ago, most of the programs I mentioned today seemed like dreams far in the future. But now it's being realized. From now on, the issues will be more like practical ones rather than political or legal ones. Such practical issues include how to secure the budget, how to train the personnel, and how to develop the space industry. The space cooperation with the US and other countries through government to government, military to military, and industry to industry relationship will accelerate Japan's effort and will enable us to effectively conduct bilateral and multilateral activities in outer space. Thank you.
Taro, thank you so much for that. Again, just a huge amount of information and a really good basis, I think, that we can base our discussion on. I was particularly interested, as you mentioned, Japan's SSA system and how that's developed in order to be able to share information with the CSPOC and with JAXA. For those of us who look at SSA internationally and the requirements, the need for this to be a true international effort, with states and commercial companies, I think it's really encouraging that Japan has decided to develop that with that goal in mind. I think that's incredibly interesting. I'd like to start off with a question. You mentioned when you're talking about the developments in the military in Japan and space mission assurance and the potential to disrupt adversaries' command control ISR capabilities. I wonder if you can expand on that a bit. We've also had a question come in, which is, wondering whether you foresee the possibility of Japan developing or acquiring ASATs in the midterm, next decade, which types, what scenarios, and whether there are any, political or legal impediments to this. And I think, looking at the US being quite forthright in its declaration of space as a warfighting domain, and how we see that with some partners and allies not going quite as far down that route, saying more operational domain, and perhaps are less willing to maybe develop these. I wonder if you could just expand your thoughts on how far down that route do you see Japan going in terms of potential offensive counter space capabilities and that decision to treat space as a warfighting domain. I don't know which, Tara, if you'd like to start. Or Sadia, do you have any thoughts?
Tara, Hassan, please go ahead, and I will follow you.
Okay. Yeah. About the space capability to disrupt the opponent's, command and control or communication. I'm not sure about the specific programs by the Japanese government, but NDPG says that Japan will acquire such kind of capability in cooperation with the capabilities in the electromagnetic spectrum. So I guess some kind of communication jamming, jamming against the satellite communication may be possible, and also such kind of effort will strengthen the our own resiliency against such kind of ASAT or anti-satellite weapons, or attack against our own C4ISR. So as I said, I'm not sure about the specific program, but Japan will first, I think, conduct research and development programs in such kind of possibility of getting the space capability to disrupt the opponent's command and control or communication.
So thank you, Ali, for the question. And let me respond in two ways. First, on the issue of developments of disruptive capabilities. I think, as Hayashi-san has pointed out, I think the technical capability is certainly being developed. But I think the other piece that we have to keep an eye on is the legal and policy frameworks enabling their use, and particularly the extension of collective self-defense into space. So how far is this actually going to go? On your second question of ASAT capabilities, I think it depends very much on your understanding of what dual-use space technologies can do. So first, very important for many space experts, I would say the ballistic missile defense and its interceptors really do constitute a capability. So, and I think that this is something that is recognized by the Ministry of Defense today in Japan. And that's a capability that Japan has in terms of its cooperation with the US and it's longstanding. The other way that this capability, again, straddling offensive and defensive, is in terms of rendezvous proximity operations that the spacecraft are able to carry out. And I don't know if you, what you may think, Japan was one of the pioneers from 1997 onwards with this ETS-7 engineering test satellite, whereas testing these core orbital maneuvers in space up to the Hayabusa, firing essentially a bullet to gather space samples billions of kilometers away. Those are all RPO capabilities that can be, leveraged for offensive purposes as well. So I would say that Japan already has a significant amount of capabilities. I think the question is really, again, one of political and policy will to engage in that. And nothing that I have read leads me to think that Japan is interested in sort of starting some sort of an offensive war or something in space. It is, I think, watchful about this interest, but it's very strongly interested in making sure that space remains a sustainable and peaceful place. So some of these technologies, I think, can help it, but we also need to keep an eye on the legal and policy side of it.
Yeah, I think that just highlights the difficulties that we see with all the international conversations about how do we define, different capabilities, and how do we understand dual use within that framework, and therefore how can we limit certain activities or capabilities, and that quite difficult line that states are actually walking when it comes to deploying any capabilities. I had a question here on looking at the relationship side. And someone mentions, JAXA does work closely with European countries. How would the US-Japan relationship be balanced with that of EU, Japan, UK, Japan, not just military, but also scientific, academic research? Do you see any how is that balance going to stay with increased cooperation with the US? And do you see that balance perhaps being challenged in any way?
Let me take a stab, and then Hashi-san, we can have a conversation about this. Let me say categorically that, of course, Japan's military space focus is in terms of the US. But one of the points that I was trying to make is that, of course, it is also attempting to offset some of that with building its own relationships with other countries. Europe has long been an important partner, civilian and exploration side, with the European Union. And I anticipate that one of the very important ways that Japan will partner with the EU is really in helping on the front for building responsible behavior in space. In particular, I think even more than the EU, I think Japan will leverage what the UK has done in terms of trying to build resolution within the UN system towards responsible behaviors in space. So that's an avenue that I think we need to keep an eye on. In addition, I think Japan gives itself an institutional edge and also its partners an institutional edge to something like the Asia-Pacific Regional Space Agency Forum, which is an important platform for building dialogue and bringing along coalitions and partners. So yes, the US is very important, but Japan is also offsetting that with respect to legal and policy and other technological ventures with other powers. And I think this is consistent with what Hayashi-san was saying in terms of building space cooperation with others as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to add just 2 points. I think to answer the question, the SSA is a good example of cooperation. Japan alone, or even the US alone, cannot, observe the space situation all over the globe. Yeah. So such kind of, global cooperation is very important for, for example, for SSA. And of course, the US has a lot of assets and experience, so that will be, that will be US-led effort. But international cooperation with many other countries will be very important. And also, I'd like to add the Japan has experience in launching a lot of, rockets, both in the liquid fuel and the solid fuel. Such kind of capability would, enable Japan to cooperate with many Asian countries. So, for example, the Japan can launch Asian countries' small satellites within its fuel solid rockets or liquid fuel rockets or solid fuel rockets. I think 2 years ago, Japanese Epsilon rockets carried Vietnamese small satellites into space. Also, Japan's experience in remote sensing data can provide a lot of useful data like natural disaster analysis, like earthquake, tsunami, or volcanoes for the Asian countries. Also, Japan is a country surrounded by the ocean. So its maritime, domain awareness capability based on space capability will be very useful for other, Asian countries also surrounded by the ocean. So I think Japan should advance its cooperation not only with the US, with European countries and also with Asian countries as well.
I want to, sorry, Ali. No, I just wanted to echo something that Hayashi-san has put for us on the table. I think it is impossible to go in this domain alone. And I think that the entire U.S. Space Force is perfectly well aware through its capstone, and this is reflected in its doctrines, that it cannot go alone. So it needs partners not just like the United States, its foremost ally in the Asian region, but also the partners and coalitions that Japan has put into place over the past 26 years. So that gives an institutional edge to building out these physical, technological, and legal and policy platforms. So I would say that, and in partnership with the United Kingdom, for example, I think that this has a good chance of spreading in a very practical way, beyond just a military focus, to also affect civilian and commercial stability prospects in space.
Yeah, thank you. I think that it does highlight, I think Japan is aware of the need to partner not just with one, but with many. And it's almost like it's building that partnerships, the whole spectrum of partnerships into its plans going forward. And I think that's very encouraging, and hopefully something that others, as they continue to develop their capabilities and their plans, they can follow that model, and have all those different avenues for cooperation, in the military, in the scientific, in the commercial. I had another question, again on the partnerships, and it's Sadi, you evaluated Japan's capabilities as it is currently no one's junior partner. It is capable of doing what it needs to do. It has launch capability, all the different spacecraft, and so it wants to retain a degree of autonomy, and then leverage through its capabilities. But so the question is, can Japan avoid becoming a junior partner as it starts to come closer to the US and integrate its space capabilities with the US? Because I think, as I mentioned earlier, many of the US's other partners are in a sense junior partners. They have a much larger reliance on the US in a lot of areas. They don't have maybe launch capabilities in the same way. They don't have the full spectrum of spacecraft and space capabilities. And so, do you think Japan can really retain its autonomy and remain an equal partner longer term? Or will it end up becoming that junior partner and sort of be subsumed into the US sort of space architecture?
Yeah. So let me say a little bit about that architecture and its fragility, particularly for the United States. So again, which I think shows that Japan will not give up its autonomy easily, and that it will work very hard to make sure that it's positioned both within the US-led architecture, but also for it out of a sense of prudence outside of the US space architecture. The United States is probably the world's most vulnerable space power in many ways. Of the, what is it, about 3,000 or so operational satellites, the US has about 51%. If our mega constellation projections are correct, then this is supposed to go up to 100,000 or so, and they're predominantly coming from the United States, which means that the U.S. is becoming more and more vulnerable in some ways on these because of its reliability and vulnerability to all kinds of accidental or deliberate attacks on these space assets. So I would say that out of prudence's sake, Japan will, of course, build and be part of the US-led coalition. But my guess is, based on everything that I'm seeing being put into motion, it is going to work very hard to ensure that it retains its autonomy as well as its strategy outside of the US ambit as well. I think Hayashi-san put it very well. You can't get an SSA. Physically, you can't get an SSA system without really getting everybody else to cooperate. So the autonomy, not just in terms of technologies, but the autonomy to also bring along other partners is, I think, an important institutional edge that Japan is bringing to the table. I mentioned that in the context of APRSAF, this is not very well known because normally the narrative is very confrontational. I would say that if you look at what Japan is doing with respect to China, it is also working hard to engage China. It has, signed an economic pact with China. China's APSCO has also engaged with APRSAP. So there are important avenues and building blocks for cooperation between these two really formidable space powers. So that's the first big general picture, I would say. The other thing that I will say, I think I said this, I'd like to say this more clearly, is that, thinking a bit from the perspective of Japanese strategists, I would be concerned about where the United States is going to end up in about 4 years, right? So, I think I'm not saying something new for most strategists around the world. Certainly now diplomacy is back, certainly now multilateralism and space cooperation, but we're not certain what may happen 4 years from now. So out of prudence, Japan must also position its own capabilities autonomously, whether technologically or in terms of cooperation with other partners beyond the US. So just to be clear, Japan is not going to give up its autonomy. It's going to work very hard to retain that autonomy. It has done so for the post-war period, and I do not see that changing anytime soon.
Great. Tara, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add just one very abstract comment. I think it is important for Japan to develop or advance its specific programs like SSA or hosted payload cooperation with the US. I think, by doing so, the US is, crucial partner for Japan. But by making such effort, I hope that Japan will become the, is crucial or essential partner for the US too. The kind of, effort by Japan will, prevent Japan from being, the junior partner.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it does highlight that need for all to bring value to those relationships, to not just be reliant, but to add value to partnerships, to help strengthen your voice within that partnership. But I think, very important, as you mentioned there, we don't know where the US is going to be. We don't know what that looks like long term. So ensuring that you build in your own resilience and your own strengths to your programs is important. And again, the need to work across different partnerships and ensure you're not just relying on one. I'd like to bring the conversation around to, Sadi, you mentioned multilateralism, and we're seeing that with space now, with the UK-led discussions through the UN, with the first committee on norms of responsible behavior in space. And the role, I think, that countries like Japan, like the UK, who are important allies and partners, but are not the great powers and who don't have the more concerning capabilities that we see into, with direct descent ASATs, for example, and the role that they can play in creating dialogue, enhancing dialogue, and bringing some of these forward. And so there's a question here alongside that. So from a Japanese perspective, what type of confidence building measures might help reduce misunderstanding and miscalculation in outer space? So how is Japan, I think, approaching some of these questions about norms of behavior? What is threatening behavior? How do we understand intent and attribution? And how is Japan approaching that? Any thoughts, any ideas of how Japan can continue to play a role and help to push some of these dialogues forward?
Sam, is it okay if I start? And then,
yes.
First of all, let me say that Japan is not new to this game. So it is already advancing both public, both the government and also as private players are already playing a role in terms of establishing some of these, or helping to build out some of these confidence building measures. I see 3 avenues that I think are going to be critically important. One is a private sector based thing. For example, Astroscale is involved in helping to talk about, and this is a company that has offices in the UK, offices in Japan, offices in the United States, and it is very involved with deliberations about what space traffic management might look like. So we're at the building stages of some of that from the private sector side. The other way that Japan has actually done this is, and I think this is just starting out and is sort of at the beginning because you have to raise public awareness about this, is through the platforms of APRSAF. And this is going to become more and more important for Japan to sort of educate and train people about building that. And I point out earlier that this is also a way to bring China into conversations about what may constitute responsible behaviors in space. And finally, I would say through the multilateral system, Ali, that you were mentioning, which the UK has played such an important role in the resolution that was passed in December last year about responsible behaviors in space. I think, if I remember correctly, Japan was one of the countries that was involved in that. And that's a platform that both countries like Japan and the UK can really help advance in a way perhaps that both the United States and China, caught up in their great power competition rhetoric, can't do as easily. So it's a great segue for Japan to do this. And Japan has played a very important historic role, both in COPUOS as well as through its many engagements through the Conference on Disarmament. So those are the three avenues that I think continue to be important. I guess I would also say that, look, we're at the very early stages of how this is going to play out. So the more we can get everybody to agree about responsible behaviors in space, led by countries like UK and Japan, through whatever forums possible, private, public, multilateral, bilateral, the better it is all around. So the big task is raising public awareness about the issue that, and I think this gets lost in the political messaging, just talking about offensive weapons and about great power competition. We must focus attention on responsible behavior in space. So I think that we're just starting out, but I think I'm optimistic that both the UK and Japan can play an important role here.
Thank you. Taro?
Yeah, I'd like to add, actually, I completely agree with Dr. Pekane. And, dialogues between government to government and, not only government to government, but also, industry, dialogues will be very important for the purposes of, confidence building or disarmament. I think Japan can contribute in that area. And also, as Dr. Pekkanen said, this kind of discussion is at very early stage, and people started to pay attention to the problem of space debris or the anti-satellite weapons. And at this very early stage, it is very important for I think every country or every people to know the exact or accurate situation in space. For that purpose, space situational awareness or observation of the space is very important. It is without SSA capability and SSA cooperation, it is impossible for us to know what is actually happening in outer space. Is it a ASAT attack, or is it just space debris or something else? So such kind of such kind of situational awareness capability is always important for any confidence building or disarmament effort. But again, in this outer space policy too, such kind of situational awareness effort is I think crucial capability for everyone.
And Ali, may I add something just to echo also what Hayashi-san is saying? And I think I go around saying that outer space activities are rooted in the geopolitics on Earth. And so what is extremely impressive to me about Japan is that, yes, it is a formidable space technology player, and while you may think that is techno-nationalist, I would say that Japan is no techno-optimist. It is also very strongly interested in making sure that those technologies sort of are reflective of or paying attention to the geopolitics around it on Earth. And that means continuing to engage diplomatically. That means continuing to build all kinds of platforms for dialogue, as Hayashi-san is pointing out. So, and again, I would also echo back that we are very much at the early stages. So the way that these formidable, space technology players help to set the foundational ways that we move forward becomes very, very important. And I think Japan is playing a leadership role in this area.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, a couple of things to pick up on there. I think that last point on we can't think of space as separate. It is part of everything else, and what is happening in space will reflect what is happening terrestrially, and so we have to understand all of these discussions within the bigger context and the rivalries and the competitions that exist. You both mentioned the commercial sector as well, and just again to reiterate how important it is to include private companies in discussions on security and safety and sustainability and norms of behavior, because they have in some areas as much or more experience in operating spacecraft and certain spacecraft. They are increasingly having a bigger share of the number of satellites in orbit. You look at the mega constellations coming, they are overtaking. You look at the capabilities of SpaceX to reuse its rockets. These are private companies, and so that importance to bring them in. I'm just briefly coming back to the role of countries like Japan and the UK and their ability to reach out. One country that we haven't mentioned at all, I don't think, is Russia. And we know that Russia has pushed back a bit on the work that the UK has been leading on. And so the importance of bringing them into the dialogue, as well as China and other adversaries of the US and its allies. I'm just wondering if you had anything to say briefly about how Japan is approaching Russia in terms of its role in space, the potential adversarial activities or relationships there.
I'd be interested to hear what Hayashi-san has to say. So I would say, I think this is an area that is probably not very well understood. I'm not sure that there are agreements in place between the two countries. But of course, if you think about the way that Japan's civilian space program has sent astronauts up to Russia, if you think about what Astroscale, they just launched on the Soyuz rocket from Russia as well. So Russia, I think, is a very important partner to bring to the table as well. And I want to be categorically clear that without all these partners, without having some platform for bringing all these voices together, we're not going to make headway. The problem is that we need to have Japan, Russia, China, India, the US, all sort of sitting at the table, UK, UAE, some of these players sitting at the table, perhaps in dialogues, in small concerted dialogues, trying to think clearly and building mechanisms for cooperation. So the other thing I'll say is that I do not know as much about the Russian space program. From what I've read, Russia is historically one of the most important powers around, and I don't know where it is in terms of the new space trajectories, but it's not a power that can be ruled out and left out in terms of building, peaceful prospects in space. In particular, I think this is because of some of the concerns that we have in the US about Russian behavior and movements with its own spacecraft and satellites in space. So, what is the logical end solution? Do we want to see this go on forever, resulting in something ridiculous that really hurts all our commercial stakeholders as well, who have a lot to lose? Or do we say, let's bring them all to the table and think about, what are their specific? I know there's a lot of challenges. This is not easy, but I think it's necessary. Otherwise, you're just going to get half solutions, and then I'm not sure it'll be stable solutions, right? So I think, very generally speaking, Ali, sorry, not too much of a background here, not sure that there is much there, but I think much work remains to be done there as well.
Yeah. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. Actually, I'm not sure about the any specific programs or projects between Russia and Japan, but as Dr. Pekon said, Japan and Russia has a history of, cooperation in this area. Many Japanese astronauts went into space via, Russian rockets. And also, Russia has a lot of space, assets, like, the most famous, example is the GLONASS, PNT system. So, Russia, I think Russia has a very, a big interest or, assets in, a big interest in maintaining the security or safe, safe use of space. So I think it is advantageous, not only for the US or Japan or any other countries, but also for Russia to keep the safety of space. So I think we can cooperate, at least we can cooperate to keep the safety of the space in that area. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like, it potentially taking quite a pragmatic approach to it and understanding where it can continue to work with Russia on areas like the International Space Station and using Russian launch capabilities and almost use those to keep those avenues of dialogue open. But I think also interesting when we think about those multilateral discussions that are ongoing, they are about voluntary norms and there's nothing really concrete about them in the sense of the legal aspect, and not everyone has to sign up to them, but of course everyone should, because any one actor in space can cause a problem, and so why it is important, even if they're just voluntary agreements, even if they're just guidelines, to continue to bring as many partners to those agreements as possible. Don't think we've got too much time for many more questions, but I just want to bring the discussion back to the private industry. You mentioned how Japan has a lot of new entrepreneurs looking at new space, but also how some of the more established industrial players in Japan are recognizing the opportunities. And if we look at the US with SpaceX and some of the others who are not only developing their own capabilities but have quite a close relationship oftentimes with the national security infrastructure in the US in terms of the what they can provide. There's a question on how JAXA sees the balance between developing the space private industry, so that the sort of the economic benefits, industrial benefits that brings, and space security, because obviously whilst there are linkages, there are sometimes maybe differing priorities, or how does it balance those priorities of continuing to develop private industry but also understanding its need to oftentimes maybe use that industry to develop its security requirements?
Okay, can I go first?
Of course.
Yeah, I'm not from JAXA, but I think, as you know, space can be, very expensive or costly business. And, considering, budget restraint, it is very important for Japan to use the dynamics of the private sector, both for, civilian purposes and, security purposes. So from that perspective, Japan enacted two acts in 2016, the Space Activities Act and the Remote Sensing Data Act. So based on such kind of legal effort, now Japan, including JAXA, is making an effort to use the dynamics of the private sector. That is crucial to accelerate Japan's effort in this area. So I think JAXA also think that it is important to use the private industry's power, both for civilian and the security purposes.
Thanks. Anything to add?
But no, I think that Hayashi-san got it. I mentioned earlier that JAXA's fundamental law also changed in 2012 to allow it to engage in national security projects. But again, it's leveraging commercial technology platforms. And one reason for that is Japan has among the lowest budgets for space. I mean, it's only now that it has gone over $4 billion. For most of the post-war period, you're talking about budgets that are $3.5 billion a year. So they have to stretch the money a great deal. And I think leveraging commercial platforms in an industry that's projected to go to over trillions of dollars is very important for Japan's space strategy overall, for both commercial and national security purposes.
Great, thank you. We are unfortunately out of time. I'm very sorry to those of you who asked questions that we couldn't get to them. We had quite a few, not surprisingly. I think there are so many aspects to that, but thank you to everyone for putting those questions forward. To both speakers, thank you so much. You've really given us some great insight into what is quite an exciting area for Japan and for space, and helped us understand better a lot of the issues and a lot of the questions that we're seeing arising from that. So thank you so much. Huge thank you to Chatham House for putting on this event. And again, thank you everyone for watching. Goodbye.